Green.
They caught two of them.
The buggers.
That they've been there already. I mean, it's not like they weren't there. They've been there from the beginning, pretty much. Not a lot, just a few. But they've showed pictures of them a while back, I recall. So
What are they? What's the word I'm looking for? Vigilante? No vigilantes. What's the word I'm looking for?
Mercenaries?
Yes. Or are they in official capacity?
I don't think they're official, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know that. I do know that they've showed a couple of Chinese soldiers, but not. I don't think it was anything big or official. You know, like they'd send us platoon or something. I don't think they did that. And it could be volunteers. I mean, they do have a wide array of volunteers. I mean,
Hmm.
people have volunteered to be, cannon fodder, which is really pretty scary, but
Oh, yes.
you know, there have been. And it's not like stuff isn't being provided by the PRC to the Russians. The Russians have bought ammunition and stuff, so I assume other stuff got bought too.
People.
Yeah, who knows? We haven't heard much about the Koreans, though, the North Koreans, so that's also
Yeah.
weird in its own kind of strange way. Let's see. I'm about ready to start. We're now ready to go, I think. See if we can get the share to happen. Um, damn it. Uh, sorry. I the link um didn't copy the link properly. Let's see if it'll do it now. Yes. Okay, welcome to this and that. Um, for the I think this is the 8th of of April, 2025. Today in this and that, we're going to continue what we were looking at yesterday. Um, I didn't get to the second reading, which was about, I think, class relations or something, uh, by Adorno, which looks like this. No, or did I not? Sorry, can't find it. There it. Oh, I scooted past it. There we go. Reflections on Class Theory, that's what it was, of 1942 by Theodore Adorno. But lest I put you to sleep, it does continue on with certain sets of relations that introduce the notion of rackets, but I think I decided to skip ahead. Otherwise, we would be here all week. And today, I'm going to finish up with the more fragmentary elements of it. And if for some reason I actually finish that early, I'll come back to this little section here on Reflections on Class Theory by Adorno of 1942. So this is further down. The next section, further materials on the racket. And as you can see, an original typed page from that which is being translated, it's all coming from the German. So it has sort of interesting elements. And so there's many of these little notes that are more or less, translated fragments that relate to a book on rackets, the idea of the racket. Now, I think you'll see in some of the outlines here that chapter outlines that what racket kind of means. And I don't disagree with it. I think that there are rackets. If racket is a kind of a rule making or a governance kind of thing that presumes rationality, so everything has a racket. I mean, I would say we here at Tech have a racket. It's a pretty good racket. I mean, in the sense that we haven't had a lot of internal conflict, and it seems everyone cares for everyone else, so that's a good thing. And so it's not that much of a racket, but there are rules. I think we actually have a lot of mutual respect and et cetera here. So I'm grateful for that. All right. Now I'll begin. You'll see that I might skip a couple of things. You can come back in and read it for yourself. But the major point that I want to get from today's little exercise is that racket is a good metaphor, but and in fact we know of rackets. I mean the current U.S. administration is running a racket, needless to say. Shaking down countries, etc. Waging war. They did their first bombing of the Houthis, I think yesterday, day before yesterday. So rackets are at work. Americans have probably don't notice that, they sent B-2 bombers to drop weapons on Yemen, a sovereign country. So people need to sort of get get with what's going on at the current moment. And of course, the comparison that was some wag compared the Chinese have not dropped a bomb um, in decades, whereas the Americans drop bombs every damn day. So anyway, uh, notes for the program of the book: their importance from antiquity through capitalism and their significance for a theory of the proletariat. The part on the theory of immiseration is to be used to show that with a decrease in immiseration, with the integration of the workers into existing society, the class constitutes itself as the embodiment of individual rackets and also eliminates everything that no longer belongs to the class. For the first time, this relationship is to be presented not as it has always been by opponents of the proletariat, but by a proletarian theory itself. Now, the problem: should there be a historical unity? Should we work out the history of the rackets, their provisional one? Perhaps we should begin by writing a chapter on the function of the racket theory in the fight against the proletariat. Examples: the American Constitution, the French Revolution. You could really see that there were rackets going on during the French Revolution, needless to say. People who would identify with their particular class or escape their particular class, and partially, and more specifically, the difference between the first part of the revolution in 1790s to the additional Bonaparte or whatever. So, thirdly, agreement between the rackets against the enemy outside. And you can argue that rackets operated in the, for example, Paris Commune. Conspiracy against the people, number 4. The whole thing must be distinguished from all the bourgeois attempts at debunking, and that we also recognize the importance of this agreement for generalization in the distribution of consumer goods. We must not forget that the formation of rackets in the French Revolution was something else again, that it was connected with the centralization tendency in the economy, hence the physiocrats and whatever. So-called progress is realized through the formation of rackets, not just the individuals, as Hegel thought, but the rackets are the cunning of reason. So you could say that in the current situation, there's a MAGA racket. Examples: change in the function of the clubs, liquidation of the municipalities. Summary of the first chapter. It is to be shown that the proof that the proletariat consists of rackets has so far served the opponents of the proletariat, and that, moreover, The proof that rule in general has always been racketeering has served to stifle any desire to exchange the present society for another. So let me break there and suggest, and because there's a section below on criminality, it is a kind of commentary on informal economies. In other words, crime exists. Some of it's organized, some of it's disorganized. You can decide which one is which. That is government disorganized crime or organized crime in that sense? And of course, now we see the melding of the two. All right, back. Chapter 2, Racket Theory in General. The fact that history is a history of class struggles means that history is a history of rackets, fighting among themselves and against the rest of society. But where these rackets reproduce themselves in the lowest classes, they are most terrible of all. Terror carried out by the lowest is the worst. The family as racket, and you can see now where they're driving at, right? Godfather, etc. It is part of the nature of this class society that it necessarily leads to rackets, the influence of need. A proposition of formal sociology which it has not expressed under the pressure of the ruling class. People within the ruled class are forced to become rulers against those who are even more powerless. So you have a division of power. The oppressed themselves still become, through this mediation, the direct executioner of those further down. Third chapter, models for rackets. The racket-like elements in the Spanish Civil War is a model for anti-rackets. There were genuinely anti-racket-like forms, not only political, but also in art, etc. You can argue that certain writers, Benjamin, Caldwell, etc., are kind of anti-racket, or you could argue that anyway. Transformation of non-racket-like groups into rackets. Impressionism. So you tar an entire artistic style with it. Psychoanalysis, Lowenthal. Historical and institutional models. Freemasons and lodges in their early days as counterexamples. That's actually kind of an interesting argument. And transformation of revolutionary organizations into rackets. Let me stop here and just because I forgot to mention it before I started recording, but I'm going to thank one of our folks here, Steve, or I mean Larry, um, for cluing me in on the connection between the LaRouches and the ACP. I was actually quite amused by a particular article on that in that context. All right, Pollock and Weil, immiseration theory and counter theory, capitalists, how rackets functioned in the 19th century and now. Example, Fox, not Fox is a writer, not Fox the network. Grossman, to what extent competition did not mediate original accumulation in the 19th century either, on the conditionality of the development of the natural sciences from the rackets in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. I think you can argue in this context of that it is a history or historiography of natural science, and that's kind of you have different academies and other kinds of things of the intelligentsia, the Illuminati, for example. The Illuminati could be a racket. Model for culture: the universities as rackets, indeed they are. In fact, I think you can see in the current day that Columbia University is a quote unquote racket. And particularly all universities that are giving up their international students are engaging in a kind of some sort of market for racketeering. Present a history of these rackets and show how it's possible for the natural sciences to hover over the entire development like a doom. To what extent, through the relationship between the university rackets and the industrial racket, the natural sciences have finally become the type of modern humanities. No special chapter on politics. Deal with it in the models. Problem, Mrs. Andre. How is England now ruled and how was it ruled in recent decades? Section B, LA, as in Los Angeles Memo, 1942, memorandum on parts of the Los Angeles work program that cannot be carried out by the philosophers. The overall plan of the work relates to a comprehensive critique of current ideology. Ideology is understood not only as the consciousness, but also as the constitution of people in the current phase, i.e., anthropology in the sense in which the term is used in egoism and freedom movements. Particular emphasis is placed on the connection between the practical, realistic spirit as it has found its philosophical expression in pragmatism and fascism. However, there is no underlying theme. The liberating features of enlightenment and pragmatism are to be worked out just as much as the repressive ones. The attack on the dominant ideology is to consist of a critical analysis of both key intellectual areas and mass culture. The success of such analyses depends essentially on their orientation toward concrete insights into the latest economic developments, because the whole thing aims at overcoming political stagnation. The aim is by no means to provide a comprehensive presentation of the economic situation and its theory. Rather, the economic sections are intended to focus on certain important individual questions, all of which relate to the theory of classes. Below, we will name individual problems that are particularly important to us. It goes without saying that the questions can be reworded by economists. Now, this is, I think, an important list, just in general, but it's sort of interesting. Number one, what happened to the proletariat in the monopolistic fascist phase? Can it still be defined today in the sense of capital? What effect has monopolization had on differentiation within the proletariat? To what extent do changes in differentiation mean changes in class consciousness and in the structure and role of the party? Number two, what has become of the capitalist class? To what extent is the capitalist class united today nationally and internationally? Relationship between trade, finance, manufacturing, and heavy industry. Status of the concentration process. What changes has capitalist class consciousness undergone, and what is the capitalist attitude to the dominant ideologies? That is, individualism and collectivism. Number three, the question of the class character of bureaucracy. We should come to a clear position in the present controversy. To do this, it is probably necessary to trace bureaucratization back to its various roots: professional civil service, joint stock company, etc. Particular attention must be paid to the problem of the separation or fusion of blank job title and power of disposal. Emphasis is also placed on the influence of technical changes on the transition from indirect to direct rule. The factory is changing from a business to an institution with its own form of life, consciously created community, order mythology, and hierarchy, supervisory role of managers in the various cultural areas. Number four, does technological differentiation lead to greater convergence or divergence of the various types of work? The chances of future democracy depend on the answer to this question. The CIO of AFL-CIO, recent publication on industrial democracy, Reutenberg and another author, seem to contradict the thesis of progressive divergence put forward by Pollock and Neumann against Marcuse. Number five, what is the current state of academic and non-academic discussion of Marxian theory? It would be extremely important to first gain an overview, which could then be critically processed. What is the position of important trade union leaders on Marxist and non-Marxist theory? Are there any serious further training courses in Marxian economics? What other important theorems should be considered today? Number six, a relatively separate problem from the above questions relates to the direct control of mass culture by the monopoly. It would be of the utmost importance for the work to have a clear idea of the control mechanisms, economic and personnel, by which each of the important spheres and the breeding of the next generation are regulated. For the film, this is very easy to establish here, as in LA, the industry, as it were. But the most important data should also be compiled for the other areas: radio, newspapers, magazines, universities, and scientific foundations. This also includes the cross connections between the individual branches of the cultural industries. Upton Sinclair, who studied many of the questions at an earlier date, may be of use in these investigations. Furthermore, the work of literary sociology, which has so far focused on German and American biographies, should be extended to other branches of popular literature and to specific categories, with suggestions to be continued through future correspondence. Other areas of literary analysis include bestsellers and book club publications, movie magazines, especially those that report on stars and their private lives. TMZ. Introductions to drugstore editions of major literature, program guides for philharmonic concerts, and other entertainment analysis of advertisements. Categories of the large work: revelation but no attack, reduction of quality to quantity, malice against different qualities, accept the blows without rancor, then you will eventually be included in the racket. Apology for the randomness and irrationality of the career, no development. Indifference to the area in which one is successful. Glorification of certain practical qualities, especially in the non-practical area. For example, dexterity, quick-wittedness, aggressiveness, technical, special knowledge, and tricks, performance endurance, pseudo-radicalism. Antinomies: the hero must be both individual and average. Conscious subordination of the law to the collectivity. Success as justification. Of course, many of these historical points are already included in the biographical work. Others that already appear have therefore been deliberately omitted here. The ultimate goal would be to develop them from a unified theoretical context, namely the tendency toward the unification of the world. Section C, letters on the idea for a racket work. Still Horkheimer. First principles for the plan collaboration. This is Horkheimer's letter to Felix Weil in 1942. My dear Lix, I received your 3 letters, and believe me, I'm also seriously worried, not so much because of the details, but because it's possible for such issues to be so significant for our relationships. I can only explain it to myself by thinking that the objective interests that are our common charge do not have as strong a claim on us as our situation would demand. You must forgive me if I first speak of principles, because a full heart must find expression. As it is only possible for people with our specific past and education, independently and implacably, the 3 of us came together to pursue theory, which was in bad hands. The Institute was to be one means to pursue theory. The Institute, one means to do this, one measure to take among others. It could always only be the expression of our own aspirations. The fact that in all these years we pursued theory, which no longer had a place anywhere else, even if modestly, without conforming or being disloyal, without dilettantism or academic diligence, is attributable to our combined will. I believe that the issues of the journal and the few books that may still appear in the next few years can be counted among the most positive things that emigration, darn those migrants, emigration has brought forth in spite of their deficiencies. Now, however, the Institute will become smaller. We must shrink for financial and other reasons. What will emerge will depend more than ever on our personal efforts, on the strength and durability of our friendship. Pessimism in relationship to our personal future doesn't lessen our responsibility in the least. The possibility that a concentration camp will threaten even us sooner or later may not become a rationalization for us to no longer desperately seek the word that can become power and can liberate all from power. If there are sentences in your letters that I would seriously like to contradict, it is those that draw fatalistic consequences from gloomy prospects. We dare not live, either politically or privately, in the spirit of time après le déluge, after the deluge. The possibility, even the probability that we will be dead tomorrow does not absolve us of our responsibility today. There is no act that could be justified by the circumstance you mentioned that, quote, will be in a concentration camp in 3 years anyway, unquote, unless it is the act of worrying even more about what is essential. Our work, however, is what is essential. Ever since the day on which we decided for purely technical reasons that I should become the director of the Institute simply because this was easier to implement in my case than with Fritz or you, it has generally come to be that you have been less concerned with questions of theory. This is fundamentally wrong. The only excuse for it would be that you had a business to run whose income made this worthwhile in every respect. But being purely a money manager is not a primary occupation. In view of the theoretical task that is our lot, simply because almost no one else is available, our strengths and talents in any case seem to be boundless. Fritz and you should actually be here already by the end of next month and get to work on the economic and political sections, that is, of the dialectics book. We would then not dare worry about anything else day or night for the next 6 months. Please don't think that we could postpone our work on questions relating to the economic significance of what is approaching to or forms of political resistance simply because Fritz, Grossman, and Gorlin cannot agree or because their freedom of expression is otherwise impeded in every way. In the view of the absence of other people who could relieve us of our task, not even the lack of talent with which you occasionally rationalized your resignation is a respectable argument. I haven't the slightest illusions about our limitations, neither about my own, nor yours, nor Fritz's. In view of what we must do, we're horribly limited, each of us in his own way. Precisely because of that, we have to double and triple our efforts. The sum of our life depends on the next few years. Therefore, if it doesn't add up because we've been hit over the head by something out there, we don't have to blame ourselves, but we don't deserve to have escaped the concentration camps so far. If it doesn't measure up to our capabilities, if we allowed it to fail due to the exclusivity of interests, passions, and doggedness, I was primarily pushing for the move to California because I saw that in New York I wouldn't be able to concentrate for sufficiently long stretches of time because of external responsibilities and all sorts of obstacles. Naturally, we could have chosen a spot closer to New York, but that would have had other disadvantages. I would have had to frequently drive back to New York. Besides that, in spite of the isolation, there's a large city within reach with all its scholarly and other facilities. If in the coming years I have to go to New York for 1 or 2 semesters to teach a lecture class, the move to Los Angeles should nonetheless clearly show that everything that is purely administrative now has to take a back seat to our main task. In this, I was thinking that Fritz and you should in the future work here for at least 4 or 5 months out of the year and the rest of the year in New York with the intention that this longer portion of the year will be used to work on our theoretical agenda. Here, you would participate in the determination and structuring of the major parts. There, you'd work on the economic sections in detail. So, after a few years, our interpretation of the current phase will be completed. It is, of course, nonsense that I could lend the project the necessary precision and concreteness, even in cooperation with Teddy. It has to be stuffed to the bursting point with historical and economic material. Otherwise, it will give the impression of being a rationalization. Questions regarding class theory. This is an excerpt from Horkheimer's letter to Pollock of 1942. Now, I think it will be possible to bring Licks to work here. We're going to try very hard. This will be the first time that I take part in such an attempt, and I don't want to think pessimistically, even though I've tried it. Of course, it would be impossible without you, but I suppose that you'll find it easier this time than at earlier occasions. In some weeks, I shall send you a little memorandum where the economic and sociological problems which have to be dealt with in the context of our book shall be enumerated. I think that these problems will be close enough to your own theoretical concerns. As far as I can see now, they are mostly related to the problem of classes. Which changes have taken place in the structure of the well-to-do classes as well as among the workers and unemployed in the last decades? Is it still possible to speak of the proletariat in the sense it played a role in the old theories? What does bureaucracy in the modern sense really mean? How did it come about and what is its real function? I think that this gives you an idea of the realm in which I need your help. As soon as the problems have been decided upon finally, you, perhaps already with the assistance of Licks, can accumulate a little hand library which you can bring along, or at least you can draw up a list of books and we can check here which ones you can find at UCLA. Neumann also will be able to give some suggestions. I think that the old theories can be maintained, corrected, or refuted only if these questions are really attacked. And I think that the time has come when we have to do it. Please mobilize the whole confidence with which you are able to create. I will need it here. In regard to Licks, Felix, I think we owe him a most serious effort to integrate his forces, small as they may be, into a meaningful work which one can live for. Jahrbuch Plans, 1942, Horkheimer, excerpt from Horkheimer's letter to Lowenthal, 1942. I know that much of what I've just said is already indicated in your text. I just wanted to restate it as I understood it when I was thinking about your problems. I shall put all the energies that are left to me into my work, which I think you know to be our work. If I'm not in New York before April, you'll be here at the beginning of that month. In the meantime, you will prepare yourself for practical work, be it by intensifying your activities in the Lazarfeld office or by accepting a commission in Washington. The time which is left you will devote to the article on the book racket, which you may be able to combine with your work with Lazarfeld, and to the furtherance of the articles which the others are writing for the yearbook. I regard the latter task as essential, since this yearbook should become a real document of independent theory in our time. I summarize the status of this matter. Kirchheimer will write about rackets in the labor movement. He will particularly analyze the differences between industrial monopolies and the trade unions. Neumann is writing a study on the possibilities of political forms which do not have the character of rackets. His study, therefore, is directed towards a political program. Gorlin wanted to study certain statistical data with regard to the changes in the working classes. My conversations with him have been rather fragmentary, and it would be very good if you could resume them. I think it would be much better and easier for him if he were to write 30 or 40 pages on German National Socialism and possibly on totalitarianism in general as a setup of industrial rackets. Section D, letters with racket collaborators and feedback on SCR 1942, a mix of translation drafts and transcriptions from the original English. These are, I think, Crane's translations from, original source material, and so they seem fragmentary, but these are all driven in terms of relevance to this racket project. Letters with Kirchheimer, Rackets and Materialist Anthropology, Horkheimer, 1943. It was an important exercise for me, this is about a year later, that the few people to whom I showed the manuscript all expressed the same concern, that the integration of the worker has, in truth, not really succeeded. Certainly, I too see the phenomena that contradict the thought of adaptation, but I believe that they do not express the same thing as the revolutionary impulses of the past. Since theory has died, they cannot apply to the principle of domination over human beings, which can only be revealed on the basis of theory. In view of the fact that the signs of rebelliousness are persistently equated with those of revolution, which is not entirely unjustified, it seems to me necessary to emphasize decisively what divides us. The economic antagonism has not been overcome, and self-evidently it expresses itself in human relationships. But the nuances and the ways in which this is expressed can make all the difference. In fact, it is a step forward that today the system of justification, that is, ideology, no longer plays the same role as it did before. It has become more transparent and more fleeting. None of them lasts long any longer. On the other hand, it has no less bloody consequences than before. Indeed, it seems that since people have had to force themselves to believe in the unbelievable, they are even quicker to lash out in its name. In Nazi Germany, there were no ideological changes, which, however quickly they replaced one another, did not lead to the persecution of heretics, and things are not so dissimilar in other countries. Now, this applies to ideology in the intellectual sense, but the decisive factor is that with the evaporation of conscious content, ideology has eaten its way deeper into the human substance. Today, it is probably more than ever in the makeup of people, in their abilities and inabilities, predilections and interests. It has, so to speak, withdrawn from psychology into the anthropological fundament. This is precisely why a materialistic anthropology is needed. This desideratum is all the more important as today we are faced with a belief in facts and hostility to theory. It's all the more important a desideratum as we today confronted with a belief in facts and hostility to theory more terrible than thinking has ever faced. Memo Kirchheimer to Horkheimer, protective custody, internment, confino, arrestations, administrative. The constitutional system of the modern era recognizes protective custody in a twofold form. Firstly, it's a mixture of a eudaimonistic idea of policing with the police state principle of maintaining peace and order among the subjects. A eudaimonistic idea of policing means there's a further example before where it says as a specific example of this would be that prostitutes entering a town have to report to the police first. As expressed most characteristically in the delimitation of police duties in Section 10 to 17 of the Prussian General Law, it is the duty of the police to take the necessary measures to maintain public peace, security, and order, and to avert dangers threatening the public or its individual members. From this, a system of preventative justice could be developed with the aim of preventing impending violations of the law by means of adequate security measures as developed in particular by Robert von Moll in his System de Preventive Justice oder Reichspolizei. In later times, the effort was made to delineate the presuppositions and boundary of preventative arrest as precisely as possible. Mention should be made here of the Prussian law, blah, 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 1850, which empowers the authorities to take persons into police custody if the protection of these persons themselves or the maintenance of public safety, morality, and peace makes this measure urgently necessary, sending people off to El Salvador. Legal literature probably discussed protective custody for the first time in connection with this law, but true protective custody was limited to 24 hours. The culmination of this formalization is the Prussian Police Administration Act of 1831, which permits imprisonment for one's own protection for the elimination of disturbances which have already occurred to avert imminent danger for a single day in the event that averting the disturbance would otherwise be impossible. However, in cases of emergency, exceptions have been made to the strict limitation of preventive detention, which is common in all countries. In particular, the regulation of prostitution has seldom adhered to such limits, and under various pretexts, regulation with considerable restrictions to freedom has been achieved in these areas. Dupin, general prosecutor before the Court of Cassation, wrote in 1859, this is a long quote, but interesting. Prostitution is a state which subjects the creatures who exercise it to the discretionary power delegated by law to the police, a state which has its conditions and its rules, like all others, like the military state, all reservations made on the comparison. To apply to prostitutes special regulations of police measures to which their way of life subjects them is no more to commit an attack on individual liberty than is done in the army when one applies to the military the rules of discipline by virtue of which they can be deprived of their liberty at their discretion and without formalities. Recall, this is how Gitmo operates. When customs and excise officers search travelers and lay hands on them, they in some way infringe on their liberty and their person, and yet such measures are legal, darn your tattoos, because they are the necessary consequence of things. It is to exaggerate the principle of individual liberty to hinder the legitimate exercise of other social guarantees. In other words, below the penalties themselves applied by the courts of repression, there may be, in the matter in question, a series of measures such as incarceration and visitation of prostitutes, which constitute only police means and which may legally result from the exercise of discretionary power abandoned to the administration, a power that the police exercise freely under constitutional guarantees. The situation has not changed to this day. That was from things that applied to individual women of 1909. This situation has not changed to this day. As the following excerpt from the New York Post of August 17, 1941 proves. Police Chief Wilson from Augusta, Georgia, said that under a registration plan instituted last March, a prostitute reports to police when she comes to town. She is kept in jail for 30 days and allowed to remain there only if eligible for a physician's certificate showing she is disease-free. Now, note this is also the concept of quarantining, which we've actually seen applied. Not so well in this country, like during a pandemic. While these exceptions to the principally constitutional character of the court's jurisdiction to issue arrest warrants were restricted to certain subject areas and narrow sectors of persons, the actual development of protective custody came about through such legislation of exception. The prototype for all subsequent legislation here is entitled An Act for Empowering His Majesty to Apprehend and Detain Such Persons as He Shall Find Cause to Suspect as Conspiring Against His Royal Person and Government. This served as the godfather for the famous regulation of the Defense of the Realm Act of 1914, as well as regulation of the Defense Regulation for 1939, which allows the Secretary of State to intern any person whom he has reasonable cause to believe to be of hostile origin or associations, or to have been recently concerned in acts prejudicial to the public safety or the defense of the realm, or in the preparations or instigation of such acts. The majority vote in the famous decision King v. Halliday ex parte of the House of Lords in 1917 attempted to work out the distinction between punitive and precautionary methods. But Blackstone's commentaries, 136, had already pointed out that the confinement of persons in any form are to be regarded as, quote unquote, imprisonment. And fascist legislation has openly admitted the purely fictitious character of the distinction between arrest on the grounds of suspicion and arrest on the grounds of demonstrated guilt by declaring that tacking on protective custody to a criminal sentence permissible in principle. In Germany, protective custody was introduced as an official legal institution. 1916, the executive power may impose custody or restriction of period of residence on a German citizen on the grounds of war or a state of siege, if this is necessary to avert a threat for the security of the Reich. The rise of German fascism then introduced protective custody as a general legal institution no longer bound to temporal limit for the purpose of securing the construction of the new state against its enemies. Darn those aliens. Ray, history of the concept of protective custody of 1941. And then there's the letter with Marcuse. I'm coming to the end of this, so there is more here on rackets. I think I've introduced enough of that to give you a sense that a racket helps combine certain kinds of problems, issues with law and definition under the law, how laws are sort of constructed, whether they're constructed by the state or by legislation. There's a clear difference between a police agency deciding to do something or pronouncing something and legislation of that similarity, although, as we can see recently, there's a problem with that as well. The concept of labor aristocracy I thought was important here because it occasionally gets mentioned, and often it's only defined in the terms of the 19th century, or it seems less applicable to labor organization when in fact it always is there. There is labor aristocracy exists in every field. For example, airline captains, pilots have a different position relative to flight attendants and mechanics, and et cetera. And there is a labor aristocracy, although they come together during certain kinds of strikes, but not everyone. All right, excerpt from Marcuse's letter to Horkheimer of 1943, Labor Aristocracy, Labor and Capital. You ask me, this is Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse, you asked me to expand on the problem of the labor aristocracy and its relation to the rest of the workers. I'm thinking and even writing quite a bit about it, but I'm far from clear. You know that Marx explained the rise of the labor aristocracy by the surplus profit, which under certain definite conditions becomes available to the most productively working capitalist enterprises. It seems to me that this is still today the key to the problem. The vast growth in the size of the labor aristocracy apparently corresponds to the growth and the basis for surplus profits. At the present stage of the development, not only a few particularly favored enterprises, but almost all the large monopolistic concerns work under the conditions which make for surplus profit. On the other hand, the harmony of interest between the union bureaucracy and the large monopolistic combines is well known. You find some very good remarks on it already in Hilferding's Finance Capital. All this would make the hundreds and thousands of employees of the monopolistic key enterprises the true mass basis of the collaborationist labor groups. The relation between the aristocracy and the rest of labor is not entirely that between active leadership and passive followers. The trend towards collaboration is fed from below as well as from above. The material benefits derived from the union policy is very strong and very real tie, but what is the economic source out of which these benefits are being paid? Again, the surplus profit? I don't know. In any case, I think we know how the relation is in Nazi Germany. It is one of definite hostility towards the stratum of sub-leaders, foremen, trustees, etc., who the Nazis have cleverly trained as a politically reliable and materially privileged elite. This is why I said that the fascist Gleichschaltung of labor have certainly not been successful. However, the opposition is not yet a political one, that is to say, not of the class struggle. It is a spontaneous localized protest against harsh working conditions, speed up methods, long hours, bad food, etc. In this country, the identity of the immediate interest between the union leadership and the organized workers is so great that the former may almost be characterized as the true representative of the latter. Moreover, in some striking cases, the collaborationist attitude of the workers seems even stronger than that of the unions. Take the famous Jack and Heinz factory in Cleveland, good article on it in the New Republic of October 25, 1943, which is praised also by the Communist Party as paragon of the true relationships between workers and management. It is perhaps the most outstanding example of voluntary coordination of labor, and it shows how smoothly fascism can progress in a democratic environment. I'm close to the end. There is this overall element here, as with the overall thinking of the Frankfurt School critical theory, of this addressing economism, that is political economy, with issues of, and I don't know if you want to call it psychologism, but certainly issues of behavior that can be addressed or should be addressed from a social behavioral point of view in terms of behaviorism by not only the psychology areas that cleave towards the psychiatric and those which are simply trying to organize human behavior as a function of economic behavior. So that's the overall set of themes, is trying to work out this social relationship. And the idea of social relations goes back to Marx, of course, but you can see it in the 20th century context and with the Frankfurt School critical theory, is that you can see that with the demographic changes, that is, there's just more people, and of course, larger organizations, there's the scale and scope problem. You have greater, levels of division of labor, divisions of administration versus management, which are not identical, and all of those kinds of things complicated in terms of questions of property, rights, ownership, etc. So all of those things are there in the further documents. This is the important point, is of course that rackets cover everything, or can cover everything, but um, it's not a firm theory. Let's just put it that way. It doesn't, it's not quite all worked out. And I think that's the interesting thing about this project, is that you can see that rackets are a way of getting at the issue, and also to see it not simply as a theoretical matter, which is what the distinction that they're making is very German, in the sense that you come up with a theory first, and then you sort of work through reality, and rather than going as in an anthropological way with the empirical, and trying to work through it like not unlike anthropology. So that's kind of stuff. Uh, and there's a lot more of it. This is when I divided everything up, there's a lot more in this part than in the other part. There is a section here on criminality and theories of the criminal within the context of the difference between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Although I don't see here, and I'm sure it's done somewhere else, is what is the role of the lumpen proletariat, just to use the Marxian kind of notion of what counts as criminality. And maybe I'll even come up with a question to ask these folks: where is the lumpen proletariat in this racket-like thing? So there's that in terms of questions I would ask anyway, and I'm sure you have your own kind of questions. These are really interesting letters, and I'm grateful that somebody's translating them because certainly they're not. Some of them anyway, most of them are not available translated in English, and there are those of us who just can't read German to save our lives. So, and considering the current political state, we may have to learn it. I came across this really neat little poem, an Italian poem. Um, uh, and it verges, of course, into the literary, as I think philosophical works do. And this one is called "We Nailed to Our Pride, like wheels on iron pivots, we tire in eternal circles, ever wandering and always here." And it's a good way to begin talking about operaismo stuff. I included at the end a biographical note on Adolf Lowe. And for some reason, I'd forgotten that Adolf Lowe was the mentor of Robert Heilbronner. So the continuity, of course, of the Frankfurt School through the New School for Social Research is sort of there. Adolf Lowe, um, to give you the short story here, Lowe, while he's a regular economist on the one hand, a German trained, um, he is not, he's not really into the math thing so much as he's trying to work through things that have been referred to as institutionalist. And I don't know if I could argue this, I probably can't, but I think there are certain issues, and it would be probably interesting to see what relationship Adolf Lowe had with von Hayek and Mises. And so those are interesting future things to yak about. So anyway, Lowe retired in 1963, remaining at the New School as a lecturer. Returned to Germany in 83, died at the ripe old age of 102. And the fruitful interdisciplinary communication between economics and sociology, which has always been a problem. I mean, it's a problem in every damn field, partially because the idealist kind of predilection towards these sorts of things is always confronting a materialist or a material world. So anyway, that's all I have to yak about because as I went over time, let's see if there are commentaries. Yes, Racket does dovetail with cultural capital. Clearly, yeah, that's all about it. But then you get into the question of what counts. How do you start measure? Can you measure anything, surplus value, et cetera? Because then you get into kind of fuzzy areas. Bible racket, yada yada. Okay, so let me thank you for your attention. Thanks for that little cartoon as well. And I'll put the link in here for those who came in late. And let me thank you for your attention. And let me shut the live stream off and return us to our more profane activity.